Drew Davis, it's a pleasure to have you on the Path to Follow podcast. You are the fourth guest on the podcast, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you today. You're a new faculty member, so this is definitely a weird time to come into Gilman as a new teacher, and I'm very curious about what your experience has been like. And really, I want to just talk to you about how you got into teaching, what your story is, and what it's been like so far here at Gilman during the pandemic and teaching, through the hybrid model and on Zoom. And but I think maybe if we can just start out of you talking a little bit about yourself and how you got into teaching. How'd you find Gilman?
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
This is my first time on a podcast, so I hope that I'm able to give information that people will want to hear. But so where to start? I guess it was just, well, I'll start from college. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I was an econ major, and I was more focused on track and field than anything else. But that kind of changed for me my senior year when I got more involved in psychology and I decided that I wanted to do something that would allow me to be able to connect with people. And I didn't know whether that was teaching or counseling or whatever. And so I spent all of senior year trying to get it together and figure out what it was that I wanted to do that would make me happy, instead of just jumping into a career in econ that I wasn't happy with and I wasn't satisfied with and wasn't going to change anyone's lives. So right out of school, I kind of got a job working in special education at a school nearby, and that kind of gave me the experience that I needed to be able to decide that I wanted to teach, and I wanted to teach high school, and I wanted to be in the classroom and not have sort of an administrative role like looking on the outside, but I wanted to be able to directly impact whoever I was teaching. And that's when I was connected with Carney Sando through my brother, because he was a teacher at Berkshire, which is a boarding school in Massachusetts. And then through Carney Sando, I got in touch with St. Paul's, and the rest is history.
I think once you find out about Carney Sando, it makes things a whole lot easier, because Carney Sando and Educators Ally, in my experience, they just hook you up with so many different opportunities and let you know of all these openings. And I think once your name is out there, it's just like, it just makes it so much easier to apply and kind of get into the funnel of teaching.
Yeah, and I think that it's a great community too, because once you get involved with a Carney Sando circle, it's like schools from like connecting areas and schools from like outside of like the mainstream Northeast areas are like interested in you because they either know you or have seen you before at a conference, or just have heard of your name before just through that resource. So it's definitely been helpful for me. But yeah, I'm really grateful to have had that as a resource, because I don't think that I would be where I'm at right now if I didn't use it properly.
I think so. It really casts a wide net, and it allows you to kind of pencil in the areas in the United States and, the certain type of school that you're looking for. And then you can really kind of narrow your scope and figure out what school matches for you, which was helpful to me too. And I think Educator Ally actually was even more useful to me. Did you use?
No, I'm not familiar with that. How does Educator Ally work?
I think it's a little bit of a smaller firm than Carney Sando is, and I first heard about Carney Sando when I was doing a similar type of internship, and it was helpful, but it wasn't as personalized in my opinion. And Educators Ally, like I had a spokesperson or a mentor kind of helping me, like texting me every day or emailing me every day, hey, this school opened up, and it was like, wow, it's firsthand personal, and I thought it was just very helpful, those I guess, how would you just, like, what are they, I guess, I don't even know how you would describe what they do, but they're just, they help teachers find jobs, basically. They're almost like headhunters in some ways, but they're large firms that, placement agency, I would say. But I would agree. I thought that was very helpful. So your first job out of college, what was that like, and how did that kind of inspire you to teach, that first experience?
Well, it was definitely an experience. I'm glad to have had that one close to home, because it was such a tumultuous environment. But even though it was a difficult area to teach.
Where was it?
In Chester, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Which is like a pretty rough area, and then you have kids coming.
I totally forgot you're from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, you're from Philly too, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah.
Where exactly are you from?
Mount Airy.
Mount Airy, okay.
Yeah, and I live in Flourtown now.
Flourtown.
Yeah. Where are you from?
I'm from like Berwyn, Paoli, kind of out near
like
Valley
Paoli
Forge
Pike?
area. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I used to work at Westchester Parks and Recreation.
Oh, no way.
Over the summer as a camp counselor. So, yeah, I used to drive by there like every day to work.
So even before this internship experience, you were already kind of involved in summer camps and helping young kids too. So you were already almost on that path beforehand.
Yeah, I was like, I might as well just get some experience working at summer camps, because if I want to be a teacher, like, this is basically what I'll have to deal with. But then I ended up loving it, and I've been doing summer camp ever since.
Yeah, it's great during the summertime. A little bit extra money, and you're still doing what you love. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you find high school as kind of the grade level that you wanted to teach? Because I know here you're teaching 10th grade American Lit.
9th and 10th.
9th and 10th.
So I guess it was just me wanting to connect with my high school self. Like, I was thinking about where I was in high school and how much support that I needed to become the writer that I am now. And I don't know, I figured that I wanted to be that teacher that like helped my younger self, if that makes sense. And high school is just a great age for like self-discovery. And I feel like high school students need younger teachers, and they need dedicated and motivated teachers to be able to guide them through that process of just finding themselves and discovering what it is that they want, because when they get to college, it's just a continuation of that discovery. So that's kind of what drew me to high school at first. And I know, like, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Now I'm here, I'm like, oh, but like, I love kindergartners. But I think for now, I think that like it's been a good decision, and I'm glad that like my first intuition was to just come to high school and teach high school, because high schoolers are great. Like, they're difficult, but
How are your classes this year? What is it like teaching high school at Gilman?
It's different. I mean, I have all boys as opposed to a more co-ed environment, which has been an experience, just because I'm used to seeing girls in the classroom. And just having all boys in the classroom, it's just like, oh my gosh, like I'm like the only like woman here. But the boys have been great. I mean, you have your like quiet students, and you have your students who are super talkative, and then you have the ones that will warm up to you over the course of the year. So I mean, it's been pretty typical, besides the fact that like we're online and we have to wear masks and everything is different, and just adjusting to everything. But I've been getting used to my students and just getting to know their names and their personalities, especially in writing comments now. I'm like, oh yeah, like this student, I know who you are because I see you every other day, and you sit in the front of the class, and you're usually the one that talks about how much he hates Romeo. Like, so getting to know the students it's become so rewarding for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just gonna end up it's gonna accumulate over the year as I get to know them more. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think the thing about Zoom, which was actually helpful for me in the first couple of weeks, is that everyone's name is right there on Zoom, so it helped me learn names a little bit faster.
Definitely did.
So, I mean, maybe we can start out on Zoom even after the pandemic is over, just to get the names down, because that's always tricky for me when you have a lot of students and you're trying to figure out, who's in my class, who is this person who's not talking much, or who's this person who, won't stop talking. It's like, let me get their names down first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is, I thought that I would still be struggling with names, but by the time we transitioned to in-person classroom, I knew everyone's name. And I'm just like, I have so many students, like, I'm not going to remember names, and this is going to be super difficult, but it happened so naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes with getting to know the students, because once you know their personalities, you're able to like pinpoint like who's who. And having the names on the Zoom meeting, that was really helpful.
Yeah, it's the silver lining of this whole thing, right? Like, that's one piece that's great about Zoom. But there have been a lot of difficulties, and my next thought or topic of conversation is what has teaching during the pandemic been like for you, and what are some of the more difficult parts of it that you're finding?
Yeah, I don't know when Gilman started their transition to online, maybe in the spring, right?
I think like March 20th maybe was, when we kind of just all went home. I feel like I just went home right away to my family's house in Philadelphia right after this whole thing, and that was March 20th, and we were talking about it earlier. Is it really?
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah, I went home on your birthday, and then I was there pretty much for the whole summer. It was just like almost a blur, it was just a crazy time, but definitely glad that we're back, and there's somewhat of a schedule to our days now. But to like those first couple of weeks going home, it was just kind of a mess. It was total chaos, and we're like, all right, now I'm going to set up a Zoom account and have all my kids that I just got to know throughout the year, try to motivate them to join me on my Zoom conference for 80 minutes, and it was very tough. But
yeah, I agree with that, because we went home for spring break and we started late February, and then I just stayed home throughout the entire summer, and I was expecting to come back. And New Hampshire is a 7-hour drive, so I didn't go back until June to get my stuff from New Hampshire, and at that point I had to like move everything out. But it's weird, because some of the students that were more talkative in person were like either really quiet or distracted online. So the dynamic of the classroom changed. And I'm glad that like we've had a lot of practice being in an online setting, so that when we came back this year, obviously it was different because you have new students. But like we had that practice with being online and lesson planning for that sort of platform to be able to at least have some sort of confidence. But it was extremely hard just trying to get to know students, like knowing where their head was at, and just like knowing myself and how I am with being online and like doing the whole online thing with like faculty meetings and things like that. It's super hard to
very hard.
Stay like on task and focused, and especially since we had 80-minute classes starting out, it's like, how am I going to keep these kids' attention for 80 minutes? Unless like I have them like repeat after me, like but
totally. And especially with all the distractions that they have at their fingertips. They have their phone, they have Twitter, Instagram. Like, I can barely do it during faculty meetings. They're at home too, so they've got their Xbox, they've got whatever it is, around them, family, dogs barking. Just a crazy situation, and it really tests teachers to try to, figure out a lesson plan that's going to draw these people in, these students in.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's even worse for them because they have grown up knowing these things. So it's like TikTok is their go-to, or Snapchat is their go-to. And so like their level of attention is just, it's so much shorter than ours is. So yeah, just lesson planning for that has been really difficult. But it's a process, and like I think that we're all getting better with doing that, and you learn from your students who are less attentive how to restructure like your lesson planning and your pedagogy so that it caters to students who are more or less attentive, or who work better on an online environment than an in-person environment. And that's just something that I think they understand, because this is something that's like unfamiliar to them, but I think that we understand that also, and we're very supportive of each other. Like this has been it has been the most supportive like environment for me when it comes to just the unknown of everything, and accepting that we're all undergoing this process together.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
So coming to Gilman in your first year, you've had to juggle all of these, new updates on the daily almost, right? And what has that experience been like, your transition? Actually, maybe we can backtrack just a little bit and talk about where you were before coming to Gilman, and what your experience was like at St. Paul's.
Whew, St. Paul's.
Yeah, what was that like?
Boarding school. I miss boarding school a little bit, just because, and that might just be because we're in a pandemic right now, so I haven't gotten to experience the fullness of day school. But yeah, I miss being around the students as much as I was. Yeah, St. Paul's is a very competitive environment, and I also, was at Penn, had to go through that for 2 years, and so, I had a very structured schedule.
And I'll say about the Penn Fellowship Program is a 2 years master's program. Both Drew and I were involved in that program, and I think so obviously we're at separate schools teaching for 2 years, but we're also taking online classes through Penn. There were certain weeks and weekends where we were going to Penn and actually meeting each other and, having the in-person weekend, but it was mostly virtual. And I think having the experience of actually taking classes virtually has just pretty much prepared us well for the pandemic, which I don't know if you'd agree with that, but I think we were using Canvas, we were submitting, Google Doc assignments. I think that's made my job as a teacher just a little bit easier, having done that as a student.
Yeah, because we understand how it works, having been students. And so, we're able to jump in the mind of the students and figure out what worked for us and then experiment it on them. But yeah, that experience definitely, I think, kind of prepared us to be online teachers, especially since the program just is designed to be an online program, because we just can't get to Penn every weekend, especially if you're a student who is working at a school that's 6-7 hours away. It's just impossible to be able to attend online class or to attend in-person classes. So I think that Penn is a great example for online programs that work and keep students involved and engaged and learning at the same time. So yeah, I agree with you that it definitely prepared me as an online teacher. And I just think that in combination with teaching at schools, I think that the Penn program just really went well with that. It definitely made my experience a lot easier, and it added a lot more depth, just because I was working towards something, and it just wasn't I'm just teaching students and I have my own agenda. It was just I was teaching students so that I could add to a greater cause. So I really appreciated that, and it really added to my experience at St. Paul's, just being a part of the Penn program. Did you feel the same way about, I don't know how you felt about if Penn added to your experience at Gilman, but.
I think it was interesting. I think most of what I was really lucky. I had a great mentor with Brian, and he was the first guest on the podcast, so we talked a little bit about this. But Gilman paired me up really well with Brian, and he was great in sharing his resources and his syllabus, and I would observe his class and then go right to my class and teach. So I felt like a lot of my teaching practice was influenced most by Gilman, but I think some of the peripheral like social, like being conscious of some social factors and learning about the adolescent development of kids, and I think the networking and just talking to other teachers at different schools and finding out what they do was really beneficial to me. And the people that I met through the Penn program are people that like I want to have on the podcast, or I'm going to be able to like call with questions or email with questions down the line. And I think that was super valuable for me. Maybe even more so than the content of the curriculum, but you know, I'm definitely super grateful for Gilman and for Penn for providing me with all those resources. And again, I think like the virtual experience of the program somehow turned out to be super beneficial. Now it's like I know how long a Zoom call should go before people are, you know, faces glaze over and it's time to give you some work to do on your own. So balancing the independence and like the synchronous learning, that was almost a given when the pandemic struck, which worked out well, I think, for us. But I can't imagine other teachers who didn't have that experience are like, what do I do? How do I teach through a computer camera? It's just insane. Yeah,
it's difficult. I actually am glad that we kind of got an experience like learning synchronously and asynchronously, because I would have had no idea how to navigate that or even know what those words meant. I know. In that kind of way if I hadn't been through the Penn program, just because, you know, like with my methods course, it was just like, all right, we're going to do this work asynchronously, and then we're going to meet synchronously these days. So then I was able to translate that onto my students and tell them, all right, we're meeting asynchronously today, and that means that we're not going to meet over Zoom, but you will be doing work on your own. And so just that experience, just with certain terms that I use with my students are things that I've learned from Penn, and that I'm able to, even though like we learn these things in faculty meeting and how to teach students online, there are things that I was able to pick up on and be like, all right, I already know what that means. So I can just jump right on into it. When they're trying to show everyone how to work Canvas, you're like, I've been doing this for years. I'm all right. I can check out on this. Right. That's awesome. Good. Yeah. At St. Paul's, did you have a similar mentor-mentee structure? What did that look like? Because I know every school in the program, and I think there are 12 boarding schools and 12 day schools. Mm-hmm. St. Paul's is one of the boarding schools. They all have different ways of going about the mentor-mentee relationship, and I really do think it's important to have some type of mentor when you start out teaching, because if I didn't have Brian, I would have been totally lost. Same. Did you have something like that, and what did that look like at St. Paul's? Yeah, that's a great question. I had a mentor. His name was Kevin Brooks. Love him to death. He was great. Very supportive throughout my whole 2 years. I had no clue what I was doing my first year, and if I hadn't had him to observe and co-teach with, I would have been totally lost, and it would have just been a much rougher experience for me. But the way that the mentor-mentee program works at St. Paul's is, so we observe our mentor for the first term, the fall term. In the winter term of the first year, we co-teach with them. And then by the spring term, we're teaching our own class, and our mentor is coming to observe us. So like the roles kind of flip by the end of the year, which I'm so grateful that they do it that way, because then I got experience being in the classroom without having to feel the pressure of teaching. And then by the spring term, I was completely ready to be in the classroom as a teacher. And I was already familiar with the students and ready to go. And by my second year, having my own classroom, I was just like, it was almost like at that point I was ready to just like spread my wings.
Right.
So like I'm so grateful to have had my mentor be there for my first year, because then by the second year it was just like we were going through things as colleagues more than as someone who is passing down things to me.
Yep.
Yeah, but he was great, and I'm glad that we have that kind of like structure with Penn. I think it's a Penn thing, but yeah, I'm glad we have that.
Did your mentor ask you to follow a certain track in your curriculum, or was it all independent? Did you just get to teach whatever you wanted?
So our department met. I taught or humanities for 10th graders. And so the 10th grade team would meet, and we pretty much followed the same structure, but
similar to Gilman.
Yeah. But since I was working on my inquiry, they were pretty much aware of what I'd be doing in my classroom, which was something that was vastly different from what my other colleagues were doing in their classrooms. And my mentor was aware of that, and we would exchange ideas, and he was very helpful from that standpoint. But he would tell me like, all right, so this is what I'm doing in my classroom. You don't need to do that in your classroom, but I'm just letting you know, just in case you need a resource. This is what I think is helpful for my class. And our classrooms were really different. My class was totally different from his. So
Interesting.
Yeah, I would take his input and be like, all right, like that would work. But some of the things he was doing in my classroom, I'm like, that might not work for my class.
Just the students were different, or was it just a different atmosphere, or how were they different?
So the students were different. There's this term, I don't know if you know what hum chief is.
No.
But a hum chief is a student who talks a lot in class. And I had about 8 of those in the class that I was teaching.
Is that a St. Paul's term, or should I know that?
I think it's a St. Paul's term.
A hum chief.
Yeah.
I'm going to start using that. They just take over the classroom?
Yeah, they just talk and talk and talk. Yeah, but I think that like schools that don't have humanities or don't teach humanities, it's really just like not applicable. But yeah, so we had hum chiefs at St. Paul's, and there would only be like 1 or 2 in like each class, and that's why it was such like a different term. But in my classroom, I had about like 8 students who would talk, and they'd go back and forth, and we'd have great discussions, and sometimes we would talk for like 45 minutes, and I'd have to be like, all right, well, class is over, so we need to go. But
you with the 8 students who wanted to talk, were there 8 in your class, or were there fewer than that?
So we had 12 students in my classroom.
How many hum chiefs?
About 8.
Really? So
yeah.
What do you do with the other 4 kids who aren't? Because it's easy to fall into that trap, and I do it even with like 1 hum chief in my class. Like I want to just talk to him about the reading. Like, how do you incorporate the kids that maybe aren't that into English, or aren't that, maybe not on the same level as the other students in the class? And I think St. Paul's is co-ed, right? There are girls.
Yeah.
There are girls in your class too. Okay.
Yeah. So for students who weren't as talkative, I guess that's where like the board activities come into play, because I'd have students write on the board, or I would do a lot of group activities, and probably by about like a month or 2 in, I knew like how to pair students up. I knew which students were more talkative and more quiet, and I would pair them up accordingly, just so that quieter students just got a chance to be able to work with more talkative students and collaborate on certain things. It was really difficult actually to kind of create an environment that was comfortable, but to not force, but get students who are more quiet to feel like they can speak. Or to feel like they had some sort of agency in the classroom, because there are so many other students who were not just talkative, but they had like strong opinions on things, and they weren't afraid to like speak their minds. And my inquiry revolved around question asking. So like my students would just ask questions all the time. So like that's why they were so talkative, because it's just like, all right, so my teacher's inquiry has to do with questions, so why not ask questions?
So I'm really interested in talking about your inquiry, but for people who don't know, what is the inquiry project at Penn's master's program? How would you describe that?
So I would describe it as more of like a self-designed project that allows you to examine your classroom over time. And it starts off with a question that you want to ask yourself, and you attempt to answer that question over the course of the year. So I don't know, I guess some people, one of my colleagues, her question was, how can I create a more agentic classroom, or a classroom that stimulates more agency?
Mm-hmm.
And then over the course of the year, she designed activities and assignments to gauge where students were along the lines of her question. So, yeah, that's how I would define it.
It was a very open process. It was
Open.
very personal, and like,
Yeah.
whatever your question is, you just take that and run with it and see what kind of answers you can find out from that one or two classes that you're teaching.
Yeah.
So what was your question, and what did you find out? What did you do, and what did you find out over the year?
So my question was, how can I get students to ask more questions, or something along that line?
That's perfect for an English.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, how do I get students to ask more questions? And I don't even remember how I framed it, but all I wanted to do was, I think that my question was, how do I get students to think about inquiry? Like I created an inquiry about inquiry, pretty much.
That's awesome. That's excellent.
So throughout the entire year, like my goal was to get students to ask questions. It was just like, what will happen if students ask more questions in the classroom? And then it was just like, bam, like once I told my students, like ask questions and like try and find answers to those questions, they created their own questions in the classroom. And then I told them, all right, so how does this book, or how does this piece of evidence or historical article relate to your question? They found those personal connections and they just ran with them.
I think that might be the hardest part of teaching humanities or just English. Like when my students come in, they always think that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, like a math test or a science test. And I think the first day I tell them, look, just tell me what your interpretation is, what your opinion is, or what questions you have, and there's no wrong or right answer. We might never even find an answer to these questions. We probably won't. But that's what it is about, is asking questions. Like, that's why we read, is so that we can think about questions, but not necessarily answer them.
Yeah, I think they see it as like an open and closed-ended thing. Like the book needs to have some sort of answers inside of them for them to answer the questions that we give them. And they don't see it as something that is open, and I think that they just like learn that over time. But like that's interesting that they just come into the classroom thinking that there are answers to everything, when it's just like the basis of English is just to discover and not have just complete answers. Like that is what English is about.
Right. So what did you do over the year to kind of get them to ask more questions? Did you just tell them, look, we're just going to ask questions today, we're not going to talk about anything? Or did you, I'm sure you had a bunch of different activities and ways of getting them to ask those questions. Is there anything that sticks out?
So this is going to be really meta, but so my inquiry was about inquiry, and I made them do inquiries. So, like, I made them come up with their own questions.
Wow.
And then, like...
You really ran with this inquiry project.
I know. I really ran away with it. It was super convoluted. And by the end of it, it was all over the place. But, like, in assignments that I would design based on books, I would ask them to evaluate the books based on those questions. So, one of my students was like, what is the point in discovering yourself and who you want to be? And we were reading The Great Gatsby, and so one of my questions for like their short written assignment would be like, The Great Gatsby, in The Great Gatsby, like Gatsby kind of struggles with himself, or like his concept of who he thinks he is and who he actually is. How does your question relate to Gatsby's self-discovery? And so for his question, it's just like, oh, that's perfect, because my question is about self-discovery. But another student might have struggled with it because their question was probably about how do I become a better writer? And so we had to kind of navigate those struggles of being like, okay, it's okay that this doesn't relate to my question, but now prove why it doesn't relate to your question.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
That's awesome, though. At least you were getting them to ask those questions and then reframe their questions so that it fits in some way. That's pretty cool. That's a great inquiry project.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy the process?
Oh, I loved it. Especially because I had my students to do vlogs, just to see where their mind was at. Because like I just had this ambitious like idea of like wanting to get into the mind of the students and like know what they were thinking, to have as much information as possible for my project. So they would do vlogs and get out all of their thoughts and talk about their questions, and they got really into it. So
that's awesome.
It was really fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So St. Paul's for 2 years, and then you came right to Gilman.
Yeah.
What made you want to leave St. Paul's? Because my internship kind of that got me into teaching was at a boarding school, Choate in Connecticut, and I loved it, but I can totally understand why as a 22 or 23-year-old, you wouldn't want to be so removed. And I think St. Paul's is way up there, right? It's way up in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, right?
It's in Concord, yeah.
Concord. What was it about Gilman that attracted you and made you want to make the switch from a boarding school to a day school?
I think as soon as my first year ended, I was like, I'm doing day school. Like, I'm not doing this again. And it was just like a lot of boarding schools in our program, they're in that northeast area where there's like nothing there.
Nothing. Deerfield and Hotchkiss.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Hotchkiss is really out there. But yeah, a lot of the northeast boarding schools are just like in the middle of nowhere, and I'm a city girl and I'm used to seeing buildings and like, I don't know, people. So I was like, absolutely not. Like I need to be at a day school, and I just felt overwhelmed just like being around the kids all the time and feeling like there were eyes on me. And I was like, I'm too young for all of this pressure, so I need to transition to a day school immediately. So I knew that I wanted to go that route.
And I think that one of the benefit of the boarding school is that you can share yourself with the kids and really get to know them, and they can really get to know you. But as a 22 or 23, maybe you don't want to share everything with 16 and 17-year-olds.
Exactly.
I would imagine.
Exactly.
And then your first visit to Gilman, what was it that struck you as this is the place that I can see myself working?
They're really passionate here, and I'll have to say Beth Knapp.
Yep. Like,
as soon as I met her, I was just like, all right, great. I want to make her my mentor, and like we're just gonna go from there. There are very passionate people who work here, and they love what they do, and it's really interesting that teachers and administrators really cater to students. And they acknowledge that students are people, and that they want to learn, and that it is a learning environment. Yeah, I really appreciated that, like that warmness about Gilman, and just knowing that the students were just happy to be here as well, and getting that vibe.
Yeah, I think that mentor-mentee relationship, that's actually what inspired this podcast, is because I think it's true that there are so many people in the administration or on the faculty that make you want to be a better teacher, make students, want to read the literature, make students want to do math. It's because they're seeing, Beth Knapp teach, or seeing Drew Davis teach, and Beth Knapp and Drew Davis love their subject and they're passionate about it. So if I'm in that class, I'm going to want to read whatever it is, that you're raving about. And that's kind of what I try to get my students to do a little bit too, is it's almost like teaching's almost like sales in some ways. Like, I come into the classroom, I have the scarlet letter in my hand, and I have to sell a 16-year-old boy who wants to play video games, do TikToks, and play soccer on the scarlet letter. And that's like that's what I feel like my duty is every day, is to make you want to read it in a lot of ways.
We are like salespeople. Like, we have to make like what we find interesting to them. And sometimes it won't be the most interesting book. And we still have to make it interesting because there are certain things in this book that are valuable to learn. So it's just like, we have to come in with that mindset. And if you're really passionate and determined to help kids learn, then it's just like they feed off of it. It's like they mimic that. They
feel the energy, right? And
yeah.
That's what I really like about teaching, is that energy, and you can feel it from the administration. You can feel it from your colleagues, the other teachers. I think Kelsey Carper, for sure, you share an office with her. She loves English. She loves reading. I shared an office with her for 2 years, and, it's contagious.
Yeah.
Just seeing that all the time. How is it for you as a female faculty member, new here at Gilman? How do you kind of sell teenage boys or convince them, that they should read what you're passionate about? What are some things that you do in the classroom, or ways to think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's usually like the first thing that I'm thinking about in the classroom.
Really?
Just like, oh my gosh, like I'm a female teacher and I'm teaching all of these boys, and I have no way of completely understanding who they are because I've never had that experience growing up being a boy.
The mind of the teenage male, no one understands
Nobody
it.
understands it. So I'm just like, I don't know how to like draw their attention. And it's different for each of my students. And I've been, over the course of the past few weeks, just trying to change things up, because my students are so different, and some of the boys will just really latch on to a certain topic because that's what they're interested in. And then some will be just like completely uninterested, and I'll have to like work in some sort of thing that is modern to them or interesting to them, but also capture the attention of the entire class. And then recognizing that they're like 15 or 16 years old, like I have to kind of find ways to draw on social media to some extent. Like, I think it was a few weeks ago, I had them write one tweet from Romeo to Juliet and one from Juliet to Romeo, and it was like very trivial, but it's just like, it's something that has them thinking about the novel, but it's something that like sort of, because Twitter is kind of like outdated, but it sort of applies to them. Yeah, they were like, what is this? Like, what does retweet mean? And I was just like,
I can't believe that.
Oh my gosh.
Because I'm addicted to Twitter. I like can't get off of it. I don't think it's outdated at all, but talking to these kids, like TikTok is the thing.
It's
like,
the thing.
And I can't even bring myself to download that. Like, I'm not interested at all. I don't know about you, but just something about it, like, I have a younger sister who's 10 years old now, and she's like walking across the kitchen doing all the dance moves.
No.
I'm like, why would I ever download this? Like, why would I need this?
Yeah. But they're into it. Like, and I'm thinking like, all right, this is like a social media thing that they would get into, and they got pretty into it. That was like the most into it like they've been in an activity so far. Just probably because of like their attention was somewhere relating to technology. But like, yeah, just it seemed like it was something that was sort of outdated to them because they just didn't understand some of the tweet concepts. And I was just like, wow, I'm old.
I know Facebook's outdated. I guess Twitter is too. I guess they're into
Snap for them, Snapchat.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
all of those things.
Like, I don't have Snapchat, but I don't really like Snapchat that much.
I don't really use Snapchat either, but like these kids will have like 300, 400 friends like it is a Facebook, and I'm just like, how? Like, how do you keep track of that many photos?
That many selfies every day. Just
every day.
Bizarre. It's crazy.
Every day. It's ridiculous, but I guess that we're just old, I guess.
It's a different world, I guess.
Allegedly.
Out there. So what else are you doing in your classes? What are some of your favorite things to teach, and what are you guys working on now?
For my 9th graders, we're still working through Romeo and Juliet.
What's that like, teaching that to 9th graders? I read that in college, Romeo and Juliet, for the first time, and
no way.
Like, I had to read the synopsis before I read it because it's difficult, and I can't imagine 9th grade boys like grasping Romeo and Juliet. How do you make that real?
Yeah, so I provided a lot of resources for them because I started off reading the PDF of it, and I read No Fear Shakespeare, and like, because I don't want to even, like, I'll read the original text, but then I'm like, okay, I don't know what you're saying, so now let me refer to something else so that I can really understand it. And so I got the No Fear Shakespeare, which is kind of like a translation that'll give you more information on what Shakespeare is saying at certain points, and then it'll retranslate it in like layman's terms.
Mm-hmm.
I gave them that resource because I'm like, I understand that you guys are probably reading along, and even though there are resources in the book that will better help you understand, here's another, so that if that's not clear, then you have something else to refer to. And I guess it just depends on whatever teacher wants their student to gain from whatever novel that they read. Like, I want them to be able to understand the idea of what healthy and unhealthy relationships are, and the differences between them, because I think that that's a very important theme in the novel. So like last week, we went through like the 1 Love, 10 signs of a healthy relationship, 10 signs of an unhealthy relationship, evaluate Romeo and Juliet's relationship based on these 10 rules. And so I had my students go through that, and then they're discovering that, oh, like, maybe relationships aren't supposed to be this intense, like, because according to this website, intensity probably isn't a good thing. But then they're also picking up on healthy parts of their relationship, and then they're able to take those things and translate them into their own lives, and be able to develop friendships and relationships that are healthy because of the fact that they're seeing it in the novel, comparing it to something else, and then like evaluating it based on that. So yeah, that's where we've been at with Romeo and Juliet, and then just like talking about like larger, more generic themes that they get from the novel, and just seeing how they understand that. But that's where we are at with that book.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And you've taught that before, or is this your first time?
Before.
First time, yeah.
Yeah.
What I think about teaching books or plays or whatever for the first time is like, it's definitely difficult, but you kind of get more into the story or the play or whatever, the poem, and you learn more. I'll probably learn way more than my students do, that make me want to reteach it and teach it again. And I think that's, I mean, I've told people this before, I've learned more as a teacher than I have in college or high school, or really in all my years in school, which is just a crazy concept. But like, you really have to understand a subject or a story to actually teach it and make it accessible to, 16-year-old boys.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you love to teach, or you want to, I guess the 10th grade curriculum, you can't really change up that much. It's kind of established already.
Yeah,
but
we're all teaching like the same books. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm interested in kind of working in some like sort of found poetry and different types of literature and media, just to give kids different modes of learning. And there are also just tons of ways that like you can teach different books, even if we're all teaching the same book. There are ways to just incorporate just different methods into the curriculum so that kids aren't just reading from the novel and just learning from there. They're like looking at videos and pictures and things like that.
Supplementary, visual, and
yeah.
And I think current events is kind of interesting
is great.
Because I've started a few of my classes with current events just to try to make it present day and real to the students. But and at the beginning of the podcast, you talked about you studied psychology at Lafayette. How did you get from psychology to English, and like what was that transition like from studying psychology for 4 years and then deciding you want to teach English?
Yeah, I think that, and I tell people that, and they're like, I don't know how. Yeah.
They're so connected, though. I mean,
they are.
Makes total sense, but
yeah, I feel like because I took a class in college and it was called like lifespan psychology, and so you're looking at how the brain develops over time over the course of a person's life. And so in thinking about that, I'm thinking about how my students' brains work at this stage of their development, and having that psychology background, and having studied that a little bit, it's easier to kind of see how students behave in connection with what I learned. Because I think that if you know how people behave, then you can know like how to teach them.
Absolutely.
And how to know them better. And so I think that like the developmental psychology from that standpoint was very helpful, because I was able to anticipate like behaviors of my students and learn them from that standpoint, know how their brain works, and I'm interested in that. Like, I want to know how your brain works so I know how to teach you. And psychology is basically like, that is the like basis of psychology, just understanding why people behave the way that they do.
Right.
And so I'm like, that's just like everything to me, just like understanding like why students act the way that they do and how can I help them to be like the best versions of themselves.
Super interesting. And I think it's like in a classroom setting or with the students, you can totally see that, and you can also see it in the books that you read and in the plays and like throughout Shakespeare. Shakespeare's so psychological. Yeah. And we just finished Edgar Allan Poe in my American literature class, and I think, you know, every story is just so psychological and so you know, kind of scrutinizing why a person acts the way that they do or reacts in this fashion, or, you know, thinks these thoughts. And I just think that psychology and English, they're so connected. So it totally makes sense to me why that was a natural migration for you from psychology to teaching English. It's pretty cool.
And like, you can like, the best thing about it is that you can give the kids like fun facts when they like arise. Like, we were talking about like Romeo and Juliet and their decision making, like getting married at 14, was that the best decision? Probably not. But it's because the brain doesn't.
14? They got.
Yeah.
Really?
Juliet wasn't even 14 yet. Romeo was probably a little bit older, but Juliet was like 13 going on 14.
Insane.
And I'm just like, yeah, well, that's because your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25, and their prefrontal cortex was obviously like still undeveloped, so they had trouble with the decision-making part of their brain. So that's why they made those decisions. And
you're
like,
throwing the anatomy at them.
Yeah, and they're just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And I'm just like, yeah, well.
Good thing I took all those classes.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Drew, we do have to run to our after-school activities. Yeah. One thing that we didn't get to on the podcast much today was your track career, and I know track is another passion of yours. So I'm hoping that we can have you back on the podcast again to talk about everything that we didn't cover today. Yeah. But the last question for you, and before we sign off, is just thinking a little bit about the podcast is called Path to Follow, and my whole idea here is mentorship and thinking about the people that inspire you every day to wake up and come to Gilman or go to track practice or do whatever it is that you love to do. Can you think of a couple people in your life that just totally inspire you and make you want to do what you love to do every day?
My mommy. Literally. The transition, just from boarding school to day school and to a new school in general and to a new city, it was difficult, very invigorating, but it's hard, just like it is for everyone. And then we have like these unforeseen circumstances. So having her there every day, checking up on me, calling me, telling me, you're going to be okay. You're going to kill it today. You got this. Oh my gosh. She's the most inspirational woman that I've ever met. And I still, to this day, have never seen her cry or shed a tear. So she's also the strongest person I've ever met. But she's really been my inspiration just every day, just getting me up in the morning and making sure that like I go out there and do my best, and that, you know, I came here to inspire people and to change kids' lives, and, you know, that's what I'm doing.
Love it. Great answer. Shout out to all the moms. We appreciate you. But Drew, it's been awesome to sit down with you today and catch up a little bit. I'm hoping you can come back again and we can talk about some more, you know, of the things that you do here at Gilman and what you love to do. But thank you again, and we'll see you in the English department. I'm excited to get to know you even more this year.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome.